Hi guys, it's me. I'm back to read our chapter book. I didn't read last night and I apologize for that. So tonight I'm going to try to read 2 or 3 chapters and I will refresh your memory. The book is called The Angel Tree. And our main characters so far are Lucy and her dog Valentine. And Lucy is a little girl who's 11 years old, and she was an orphan and was adopted. She's blind. And Valentine is her seeing eye dog, and he's very, very sick. And her mom and dad don't have enough money to get him treated so he'll get well. So she makes a wish on this tree that magically appears every year in the downtown area. And people put notes on the tree about what they wish for. And then people take those notes and make the wishes come true. But they have no idea who puts up the tree, and it's kind of a mystery. So Lucy puts on the tree that she wants help for her dog. Then we know Max. Max is a little boy whose house burned down, and he and his family are living in an apartment. And he's not a very bright little boy. So he makes up for that by doing pranks. He makes pranks. He's always getting in trouble and playing jokes on everybody. But I think that his wish was that they would have a home because they were living in a bad, cold apartment. And that's where we finished. Somebody had just asked him to do a prank because they were going to have a test. And they wanted Max to do a prank so that they wouldn't have to do the test. So that's where we left off. So now we're going to read chapter 3. And again, it's 21 days until Christmas. He's such a jerk. The words were whispered, but Joe heard them as he walked past, just like he was supposed to. Everyone at Pine River Middle School hated him, and they wanted him to know it. And he did. He knew it. But the thing was, he didn't care. Joe had not come to Pine River to make friends. He had come here because he had to. It was his duty. Though the steamy hallway of Pine River Middle School was packed with students ready to head home after the last bell, a path seemed to open up for Joe as he headed to his locker. It was kind of funny because he was probably the one person at the school who didn't have anywhere better to go. Everyone else had clubs, plans with friends, lessons, or even just a home to go to. But Joe was camped out with his Uncle Leon in a small one-bedroom apartment. The first night, Leon had unfurled a sleeping bag for Joe and told him to park it wherever it fits. It fit next to the dining room table, so that was where Joe stretched out each night, the wood floor hard under the knobs of his spine. He turned a corner, almost bumping into Anya and Lucy, who were both in 6th grade too. Joe didn't know too many people at the school, but a small blind girl with a chocolate lab as a seeing eye dog were hard to miss. Anya glared at Joe as though he had purposefully tried to trip Lucy, then swept past with a curl of her lip. Back home, Joe hadn't been one of the popular kids, but he'd had a group of friends to sit with at lunch and hang around with after school, and everyone else had pretty much just left him alone. Being hated like this was new. But in those first awful weeks at Pine River Middle School, Joe's insides were twisted so tight he could barely get through the school day. The effort it would have taken to make friends was far out of reach as the sun. When the fight with Max happened, Joe's fate as school outcast had been sealed. Joe couldn't let it get to him, though. If kids in a small town that was not his real home didn't like him, well, he could live with that. He had bigger things to worry about. Joe stopped at his locker toward the end of the main hall and began to spin through the combination. Then, behind him, he heard the one voice at Pine River Middle School that made him react. "It was amazing, I'm telling you," Max drawled, his voice carrying down the hall. Joe snuck a look out of the corner of his eye. The three girls with Max were hanging on to his every word. Joe's stomach burned as Max went past, boasting about some prank he had pulled off in his English class. Everyone thought Max's jokes were funny. Everyone but Joe, that is. Then Max was gone, swallowed up in the crowd that was headed out into the frigid afternoon. And the burning in Joe's gut cooled. "Have a good night." Joe looked up surprised. It was Camilla, the girl with the locker next to him. She had skin the color of the milky coffee his mom drank, and her hair hung down in hundreds of braids, each ending in a pink, silver, or gold bead. They clinked together musically whenever Camilla tossed her head, even though Joe knew that the real music Camilla made was with the violin. Everyone loved hearing her play at assemblies and town events. Camilla was the one person at school who was friendly to Joe, smiling, and sometimes, like today, actually saying something to him, something nice. My Devon plays the violin too. Joe nodded as Camilla headed down the hall. Sure, he could have tried to start a conversation, but he felt it was just a little too late. His status was set, so why try to change it? He finished packing up his book bag, then hoisted it over one shoulder and shut his locker. He looked out the window at the end of the hall and saw that it was snowing yet again. He pulled on his coat, meant for the mild winters of Virginia. It barely helped, and he froze every time he went outside. And then he hesitated. It was tempting to stay warm just a little bit longer, so he headed to the one place he was actually welcome at Pine River Middle School, the library. Back home in Virginia, Joe had been on the cross-country team, played in the chess club, and always worked up a complicated project for the science fair with his friend Louis. But the thing he loved most was reading, probably because his mom made such a big thing about their weekly trips to the library and the time they spent reading together after dinner each night. Here in Pine River there was no cross-country, and Joe knew he wasn't welcome in any clubs, not that he'd want to join anyway. So he spent most of his free time reading, making him a regular at the big welcoming school library. The halls had pretty much emptied out as Joe headed toward the east wing of the building, coughing a bit as he went. He stopped for a drink at the fountain just outside the library to soothe his throat, then walked through into the library. The large room was lined with row after row of tall wooden bookcases. In the center were matching wooden work tables and the big circulation desk run by Mr. Marwich, the librarian. It's Miss Marwich, the librarian. Miss Marwich seemed ancient to Joe with her old-fashioned clothes and the white hair she wore tucked up in a bun. Still, she had more energy than almost anyone Joe knew, and she was always happy to see any student who walked through the doors, even the most hated student in the school, Joe himself. Today she was checking books back in, and she looked up, her blue eyes crinkling with pleasure when Joe came over. "Joe, so nice to see you," she said. "How are you?" Joe cleared his throat. "Okay." "Here, let me get something for you," she said, pushing aside framed pictures of her wedding day and her cat Tango, and rummaging through the papers and books that covered her desk. After a moment, she came up with a cough drop. That cough just isn't leaving you alone, is it? Thanks, Joe said, unwrapping the cherry lozenge and putting it in his mouth. It was a lot more soothing than the cold water had been. Some friends of mine own the drugstore, Miss Marwich said, a lovely older couple, the Von Wolfs. They're mostly retired, but anyone who works there is helpful. You should stop by on your way home and stock up on some of these. She paused. She passed him a few more lozenges, which Joe slipped into his pocket. Okay, Joe said, though he really didn't have any extra money to spare on cough drops. It wasn't like he was really sick. It was just a cough. Tell the Von Wolfs Rona sent you, Miss Marwich said with a wink. They give special deals to my friends. It was kind of pathetic, but this was the first time anyone in Pine River had called Joe a friend. So what are your plans for Christmas? Miss Marwich asked. Joe stiffened. Christmas was something he most definitely didn't want to think about. But Miss Marwich was looking at him, and he had to say something, so he pushed the cough drop to the side of his mouth. Not much. Miss Marwich's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Christmas is such a special time of year. Your family must be planning something, Miss Marwich said, like everyone else in Pine River. They had no idea about Joe's family situation, and Joe aimed to keep it that way. I'm sure we'll do something, he said, trying to sound nonchalant. It's not a big deal. It was such a lie that the words were hard to force out. And clearly Miss Marwich could see he wasn't telling the truth because her brow furrowed even more. Christmas is a big deal, she said gently. At that, Joe could only shrug and look away. It sounds like you could use the angel tree, Miss Marwich said after a moment. Joe's eyebrows squinched. What? He asked. Miss Marwich, my dog is messing around here. You behave. Hey, get. Miss Marwich explained how it worked, and Joe had to admit it was kind of impressive, the way the people in Pine River helped each other out. But it didn't all fit. What if a kid who lives in an apartment building asks for a pony, he asked. Miss Marwich pressed her fingers together. That happened a few years back, she said. People get creative. Let's see. I think that girl got to go to a riding camp in the summer. Oh, that makes sense, Joe said. It seems to me that maybe you have a wish or two that might need granting, Miss Marwich went on. You should give the angel tree a try. I don't think so, Joe said, shaking his head. The tree was there for people who called Pine River home, not for someone like him who was hated by everyone. But even as he thought that, he could feel his wish growing, filling up his whole stomach with how much he wanted it. Miss Marwich looked at him for a moment. That tree is there for everyone, she said softly. And the wishes on it about people needing some help and other people being able to offer that help, it's simple, really. And it's the spirit of the holiday. Christmas has been my favorite holiday since I was a girl, and even more so now that Pine River has the angel tree. It was his mother's favorite holiday too. I'm not sure, Joe said. It seems silly to even hope someone would choose to help him. Well, I am, Miss Marwich said firmly, handing him a pen and paper. You don't have to tell me or anyone else what you're wishing for. Just write it up and run along. The angel tree is waiting. Joe shrugged. He didn't want to argue, even though it would probably come to nothing. He scribbled his wish on the paper and waved to Miss Marwich as he headed out. It was a short but frigid walk into town. The snow had stopped, but wind gusted through his thin coat, spreading icy fingers over his skin. He stopped at Tasty Market to pick up a can of soup for dinner. and then headed to the center of Pine River. The old brick buildings flanking the square were covered in fresh snow and lit up with strings of Christmas lights. Snow was piled in mounds across the square, and the angel tree towered above, the deep green boughs sparkling with tiny colored lights and covered with white paper wishes. Joe's footsteps were muffled by the snow as he waded over. The tree was huge. He gazed up at it, the branches rustling in the wind, the top of the tree seeming to touch the stars that were just beginning to appear in the satiny blue sky. There was something magical about it, he thought, as he tied on his wish, something that made him believe that maybe, just maybe, the wish he so desperately longed for would really come true. Chapter 4, 20 Days Until Christmas. Hey, Cammie. Cammie turned, brushing a few stray braids out of her face, and saw her friend Oliver, his sax case tucked under one arm, loping to catch up to her. The final bell had just rung, meaning it was Cammie's favorite time of day, orchestra rehearsal. "What's up?" Cammie asked, shifting her backpack so she could hold her violin even more carefully. "Not much," Oliver said, falling in step with her. "Have you started practicing your solo for the Christmas gala?" Cammie couldn't help feeling a glow at the mention of the solo. She had been thrilled when the conductor, Mr. Carmichael, had given it to her last week. But her grandmother was always telling her to be humble, so she tried to look modest as she nodded. "Yeah, it's hard, but hopefully I'll be ready for the gala." Oliver laughed. "You probably have the whole thing down already." Cammie shrugged. It was true that she'd spent the entire weekend memorizing and perfecting the piece, a section of Handel's Messiah. If the gala was that very night, she'd probably be ready. They were nearing the orchestra room, and the sounds of middle school musicians beginning to warm up echoed through the hall. Cammie was eager to join them, but just as they got to the door, she noticed her friend Max walking down the hall, probably heading to detention. The pranks he pulled were funny, but Cammie wasn't sure they were worth all the time he spent in detention paying for them. "I'll see you in a second," she said to Oliver, then waved at Max, who grinned when he saw her. "How's it going?" he asked, shoving his shaggy black hair out of his face. Max always needed a haircut. "Good," she said. "How are you?" She tried to sound casual, but Max knew her well. "I'm fine, don't worry," he said, rolling his eyes. Cammie did worry, though. Since Max was a popular middle schooler now, but she remembered when he was the kid who had to repeat second grade, the one everyone made jokes about. She'd watched after him like a hawk, not letting anyone get away with teasing him, until everyone realized it was a lot more fun to laugh with Max and his pranks than at him. And now, with the fire at his house a few weeks ago and the endless detentions, Cammie couldn't help feeling concerned for her friend once again. "I know the school is collecting more stuff for your family, but is there anything else you guys need?" she asked. "Bigger stuff like furniture? Because my grandmother was saying she could help organize another collection through our church." Max shook his head. "The apartment is too small for any more furniture." Cammie hated seeing the way the corners of his mouth turned down, and she searched for a subject that might cheer him up. "Do you have a wish for the angel tree?" she asked. Everyone in town loved talking about their beloved Christmas tradition. Max glanced down the hall where some boys were tossing a football. Cammie figured they had about 2 more minutes before a teacher caught them. "Not really," he said. "How about you?" Cammie nodded. "I want some rosin, a new chin rest, and a couple of new music books." Nothing on her list was all that expensive, but Cammie and her grandmother always had to watch their spending, and Cammie knew the angel tree gifts helped a lot. Getting ready for Carnegie Hall, Max said, his usual cheer back in his voice. Carnegie, Cammie. Oh, he said Carnegie. I'm sorry. Carnegie, Cammie corrected, then grinned. Hopefully one of these days. She didn't have to be humble with Max. He knew how much she loved her violin, how exhilarating it was to have music floating through her fingertips, how hard she worked. Speaking of which, I should get to rehearsal. See you later, Max said, heading toward the guys playing catch. Don't get in trouble, Cammie called. But of course it was too late. Max was already jumping up to grab a pass. Cammie shook her head as she walked into the orchestra. But then the sounds and smells pulled her in, and soon Cammie was lost in the familiar joy of making music. The sky was darkening as Cammie walked up the front path to the little house she had shared with her grandmother ever since her parents had died in a car crash when she was a baby. Cammie had no memories of her parents, but her grandmother had more than made up for that, attending every concert Cammie ever played in, spending hours planning the perfect birthday party every year, and having a knack for knowing exactly when Cammie needed a good pep talk or special pancake breakfast to lift her spirits. As she slid the key into the front door, Cammie had the delicious wrung-out feeling that only came after a good long session with her violin. She especially loved the Christmas pieces the band was preparing for the Pine River Christmas Gala, and of course her solo. She was humming one of the tunes as she closed the front door, but then she heard her grandmother talking on the phone in the kitchen. Her grandmother spoke to her daughter, Cammie's Aunt Aisha, at least once a week, and it sounded like they were going over the menu for Christmas dinner. So Cammie quietly took off her boots. Sound traveled well in their tiny home, and was heading up the stairs when she heard her name. Yes, of course I wish Cammie were more like that, her grandmother said. Willa is just so poised and focused on the things that matter in life. Cammie froze. Her cousin Willa was 2 years older than Cammie, and the shining star of the family. She got straight A's, was captain of the chess club, a top member of the mathletes, and had recently begun to volunteer at the hospital near their house in Pittsburgh. Cancer didn't have a chance now that the mighty Willa was going after it. Cammie's always off playing her violin, her grandmother went on with a dismissive sniff, instead of being practical and helpful like Willa. I'm sure she'll grow up sometime. I just hope that time comes sooner than later. Cammie sank down on the steps. She leaned her pounding forehead against the banister and tried to wrap her mind around what she had just overheard. Of course, Cammie had always known she wasn't like the rest of the family. She was pretty much the opposite of her practical grandma, an ex-accountant who kept a clean house, cooked healthy, economical meals, and wore rain boots if there was a single cloud in the sky. And she was nothing like her no-nonsense Aunt Aisha, a hard-working lawyer, or a perfect Willa. Cammie was the artist, and she had always felt a bit proud about that. But now Cammie had heard the truth about what her grandmother thought, and suddenly everything she'd been devoted to felt silly, like a kid believing Disneyland was the real world. Cammie looked at her violin case, and a feeling of shame swept over her. Was her music just a stupid, childish thing? Maybe she did need to change, to grow up, as her grandmother said, and maybe the time to do that was now. Chapter 3, 20 Days Until Christmas. Lucy had gone to the angel tree the second school let out on Thursday. Her wish clenched in her hand, the snow falling softly on her face as she secured the paper to a springy branch, breathing in the smell of pine in the quiet square. She knew her wish was a lot to ask at a time when so many Pine River families were struggling to get by, perhaps even too much. Lucy wasn't sure. The one thing she did know was that her beloved pet was running out of time. She was so sick. She could feel it in her bones as she and Valentine trudged home on Friday afternoon. Her dog was moving slower than ever. And then suddenly, on the sidewalk along Main Street, Valentine stumbled slightly and let out a small bark. Lucy tried to stay calm, but panic made it hard to breathe as she ripped off her gloves and ran her hands over the dog's soft fur, taking special care to see if something had gotten stuck in one of her paws. "Is everything okay, Lucy?" Lucy recognized the musical voice of Alma Sanchez, one of the people who organized town events like the Christmas Gala. "I'm not sure," Lucy said. There was a sweet trickle of relief knowing that a grown-up she trusted, who could see, was there to help, but her hands were shaking as she stood up. "I think something hurt Valentine, but I can't figure out what." "Let's take a look," Miss Sanchez said calmly, her coat rustling as she knelt down next to Valentine. "What do you say, sweet girl? Can I take a look at you?" Lucy liked how Miss Sanchez talked to Valentine, but she couldn't help noticing that Valentine didn't thump her tail in response. Valentine always thumped her tail happily when people spoke to her. "I can't find anything," Miss Sanchez said after a moment. "Everything seems to be fine. Do you think perhaps she just tripped and it surprised her?" Lucy knew that was not the case, but to tell Miss Sanchez the truth, to put into words the fear that now gripped her with iron-strong fingers, was more than she could bear. "Yes, I'm sure that's it," she said. "Can I help you with anything else?" Miss Sanchez asked. "No, but thank you," Lucy said. She picked up Valentine's lead in her shaky hands and headed home. Miss Sanchez's words had confirmed Lucy's fears. The yelp of pain did not have to do with an injury. It was from the illness. Valentine was starting to suffer from the disease that was going to take her away from Lucy forever. As they walked, Lucy murmured words of comfort to Valentine, even though she could barely hold herself together. The important thing was to get Valentine home, and then have her parents call the vet to see what could be done to ease her pain. The one crucial thing the whole family had agreed upon was that they must be sure Valentine never, ever suffered. So Lucy could not think about what it might mean if the vet was unable to stop the pain that had made Valentine whimper on their walk home. The thing she clung to as they slowly made their way home was the angel tree. Now more than ever, she needed her wish to come true. Lucy slowly followed Valentine up the wooden porch steps and jiggled the key in the sticky lock of their heavy front door. When it swung open, an unusual fragrance greeted her. Under the normal aromas of orange all-purpose cleaner and freshly dried laundry mixed with the scent of a chicken roasting in the oven for dinner were the sharp smell of disinfectant and the sweet fragrance of perfume. And Lucy's mother did not wear perfume. "Lucy, is that you?" her dad called. "There's a wonderful surprise." Lucy's heart was racing in her chest. The perfume could be anyone, but disinfectant, that would mean a doctor or... "It's Dr. Lazarus with incredible news," her father went on. She's here to pick up Valentine for her surgery first thing tomorrow morning. It's all been taken care of. The surgery, the medication, everything. Lucy's throat was too thick to speak, and tears ran down her face. She knelt down and hugged Valentine, who licked the tears of joy from Lucy's cheeks. Her dad bent down and rubbed Lucy's back. Dr. Lazarus says we're well within the time frame to save Valentine. She's going to need a week or so to recover from the surgery, and then we'll need to give her chemo pills. Luckily, the chemo doesn't usually affect pets the way it affects humans, so we can hope that Valentine won't experience any side effects. He must have noticed that Lucy was too overwhelmed to absorb any of the details. She's going to be fine, sweetness. Valentine is going to be with us for a long time to come. Lucy struggled to her feet. Thank you, she said, though the words didn't begin to express how grateful she was. It's one of the angels who deserves your thanks, the vet said, resting a gentle hand on Lucy's shoulder. One of them plucked your wish from the angel tree and came by my office first thing this morning to set everything up. And your dad is right, Lucy. Valentine is going to be better than ever once we get that tumor out of her. Lucy helped Dr. Lazarus and her father load Valentine into a travel crate and then listened as they discussed final details. The tumor is close enough to the surface that the surgery is not hugely invasive, Dr. Lazarus said as she put on her coat and readied for the trip to her office just outside town. So the recovery should be fast. We'll have her on a precautionary antibiotic and, of course, the chemo pills. You'll need to get those from the drugstore, but I've already put in the first order, and the Von Wolfs will have everything you need by tomorrow. And you should be able to pick Valentine up Monday afternoon. The information washed over Lucy as she crouched petting Valentine through the slats of the crate. All right, we're ready to roll, Dr. Lazarus said. Lucy gave her dog's wet nose an extra little pat. Dr. Lazarus is going to make you better, she whispered to Valentine, who gave a short bark of protest at being shut up in the cage. Lucy laughed. Don't worry, Valentine. You'll be out of there and back home before you know it. The words were like honey on her tongue. Lucy's dad helped the vet roll the crate down to the car and then load it in the trunk. Lucy heard the purr of the engine and the crunch of the tires over the frozen driveway. My wish came true, Lucy said. She thought of the candied orange her birth mother had given her, and the sweetness and good fortune that had come to visit her. She thought of her dog tucked safely in the vet's car, nearing the office where her disease would be cured. And she thought of the next weeks and months and even years that she would now be able to share with her treasured dog. But mostly, she thought about the angel tree and how incredibly grateful she was for the wondrous gift it had given her. Oh, that almost makes me cry. So that's it for tonight, guys. Next time, tomorrow night, we'll be on Chapter 6, 18 Days Until Christmas. And I hope we'll finish it before Christmas. But if we don't, we'll finish it before New Year's. So, I love you guys. Listen. Let me know you're listening, please. That way I know if I should just keep reading. Although I probably will anyway. I love you all. I'll see some of you this week, and I'll see you tomorrow night. Bye-bye.